Hi folks, today we're going to talk about what was happening with comics during World War II and immediately afterwards. There was a huge shift that was happening in comics, and a lot of it was due to the experiences of World War II on this new medium. The artists that emerged from the war, artists who participated in the war, came back with a new idea of humanity. During the war, one of the most influential comic artists was Bill Malden, who worked comics for Stars and Stripes in the Army. He created a one-panel gag cartoon, which started out very lighthearted, jokey, and slowly began to accrue darker themes. And as it was, he was actually on the front, responding to the kind of humor that the guys in the trenches actually had. This kind of dark, um, themed humor, which had a certain sort of indifference to authority and things like that. And these bearded men who grew up there, this kind of gritty realism, this is what he brought to comics and influenced the direction of comics. You can see in his humor a kind of stark and cynicism that was really unseen in comics before this time. Of course, war comics were very popular. There were a lot of comics that were being published at this time on war themes and shipped out to soldiers in the trenches. A vast majority of them were reading all kinds of things. The U.S. government found it very cheap entertainment to buy this stuff in bulk and ship it all over the world. Back home, a new fad emerged, a fascination with high schoolers and college kids began at this time, and Archie Comics was born when the character Archie reached a kind of exciting new fashion. Here we see Bob Montana in his first early rendition. Another theme which comes out of a kind of darker theme, true crime story, Crime Does Not Pay, by Charles Biro, was an enormously popular comic, which had some very tight, gritty realism, violence against women, and all kinds of other themes. We really saw this, and this became enormously popular. And soon everyone was jumping on the bandwagon to try and create comics that were related to gangsters and crime violence. And Crime Doesn't Pay evolved into this character, Crime, who was the interlocutor, kind of narrator, who would goad on the criminals to do these things, and then he would laugh at the end when they were caught and punished or cornered and shot. Mr. Crime becomes this kind of evil interlocutor who starts this whole theme. Some of the comics were very vivid, very powerful, and exceedingly violent, and dealt with drugs and failed marriages and really represented images in a way that were very stark. And they were not really meant for kids anymore. They were really appealing to soldiers. They were appealing to people who returned from the war. They were appealing to all people who had been growing up and reading comics for years. They wanted more true to life, more exciting, more dramatic, more like Pulp Fiction. This time we also see the emergence of romance comics or romance picture novelettes. Again, trying to appeal to an audience. This story is about a man who returns from the war, is having trouble reconnecting, and meets the woman of his life. And then here, the sense of war lingering in the background was a very common theme of the romance comics. The impact of the war, though it's not shown, is clearly felt. Jack Kirby was one of the leading luminaries of romance comic. We always think of him as a superhero star, but he really advanced and propelled a lot of the early romance comics to their peak of popularity. Here we see young romance comics, again, themes of maturity coming in. Romance comics required closer attention to detail. They required more realistic representation of daily life. Archer St. John Comics were some of the leading luminaries of publishers of romance. They had live models for their artists and things like this. This is a story about North Korean and South Korean girls who, a couple in their struggle to live in America. Classics Illustrated was another kind of call to try and gain validity as a medium. trying to appeal to parents or to elders or people who are thinking of comics as something other than just fluffy kid stuff, passing entertainment. They did pretty well, but they often struggled because really it was the kids themselves who were buying this, not the parents for the kids. Max Gaines, a longtime publisher, got out of the business and started painting these biblical stories. They were failing. They were really not popular. He dies in a boating accident. His son, William Gaines, comes and takes over, and he transforms the industry into creating educational comics, is now entertaining comics. He works with Al Feldstein to create these horror comics, taking the idea of Mr. Crime and making these the Crypt Keeper character as these narrators of these violent horror stories. This was enormously popular. One of the things that was really different about EC Comics was that they let artists draw their own style, and he had a whole range of artists working for him, and they competed amongst each other, who could be the most outrageous, who could be the most imaginative, and this really is what fueled a lot of EC Comics popularity and why people keep coming back to these as a real inspiration. One of the artists in the stable at EC Comics was Bernard Kirkstein, who came to the studio rather late, seemed to have some social problems with the other artists there, didn't make a lot of work, but what he did, he clearly had very high artistic ambitions for himself. He was frustrated because he had to work with the editors. They established the page count and what he could do, but within the limits of what he was given, he drew and rendered the stories in a very imaginative way. Here you notice how he's doing these kind of synoptic narrative within a single panel. He started creating multiple representations of a single character, trying to create a sort of cinematic effect. He was also playing on dream images. Notice here in this situation how they sort of panels within panels suggest fantasy and nightmarish delusions, but the way he paints the red and the stark yellows creates a kind of abstract canvas for his comic constructions. And so this is where he really pushes the envelope toward what's possible in comics, really tries to create a sense of drama through visually telling the stories. And this is what makes his stuff so very exciting. The other comic that he created that was enormously significant at this time was Master Race, based on the Holocaust, that had in it actual representations of the concentration camps. This was a subject that hadn't really been brought into the mass media, and this is one of the very powerful stories. He begged to get some actual additional panels for this, and it worked. Okay, now I'm going to do something a little different here. This is the review quiz. This is a chance for you to come in and look at what you got out of this lecture and see if you can answer these questions. Ready? Number one, what influence did Bill Malden have on war comics? Question two, what role did the character Mr. Crime have in true crime comic Crime Does Not Pay? Question three, what qualities distinguished romantic comics from teen comics? Question four, how was EC Comics different from the typical comic book publisher of the day? Lastly, what were Bernard Krugstein's artistic ideas for